Have you ever loved somebody so much you felt you'd do anything to keep them from harm? 16 years ago, I became a mother, and the very first time I held my baby boy in my arms, I felt such a surge of love. I promised then I would do anything I could to protect him. Unfortunately, soon after he was born, I discovered a threat to his future that would make it almost impossible for me to keep that promise. In 2005, global CO2 levels were already at 382 parts per million. That's about 100 parts per million above pre-industrial levels. Scientists were warning that we needed to keep our levels below 400 in order to prevent tipping into what they called the danger zone. Exceeding this number would lead to a level of global heating that would threaten all life on Earth. And there I was with my small child, suddenly facing a radically different future from the one I'd imagined for him. There was so much going through my mind, but one question stood out. How was it possible that scientists knew this, that industry knew this, that politicians knew this, and yet here we were carrying on with business as usual? We seemed to be in the grip of some big, powerful story, and I kept wondering what it was that could have such a hold on us that we would risk our own extinction. I soon discovered that it was a story of economics, at least a story of economics as we tell it now. You see, if we could travel back to ancient Greece and hang out with Aristotle as he wandered the dusty streets of Athens in the 3rd century BC, he would quickly remind us that the word economics comes from the Greek words ekos, meaning home or household, and nomos, meaning management. So at its core, economics is a system by which humans manage their resources for the benefit of all. It is the art of living well. Aristotle distinguished this from chrematistics, which comes from the Greek word krema, meaning money. Chrematistics focuses on the accumulation of private wealth. It is the art of making money. So we seem to be conflating economics, the art of living well, with chrematistics, the art of making money, and in doing so justifying the buying and selling of anything we can get our hands on, regardless of the consequences. To me, that seemed like an insane way to do economics, so I started to look for some hope and sanity. I found it when I discovered the work of Chilean economist Manfred Max-Neef. Max-Neef was a professor of economics who began his career teaching at Berkeley in the 1960s, and in the 70s he travelled to Latin America to work with some of the poorest people on the planet. He used to tell a story of how he was one day high up in the Sierra Mountains of Peru in an Indian village. It had rained all day long and the ground had turned to mud. Manfred walked out and he met a young man. He knew that this young man had a wife and 4 children and a mother to look after at home and no job. The man looked thin and hungry, and he was standing with his bare feet in the mud. Manfred looked at the man and the man looked back at him. Here he was, this great economist from Berkeley. What should he tell him? Should he tell him to be glad that GDP was rising by 5%? Or that exports were blooming? It all seemed absurd. And he said of that moment, I looked into the eyes of poverty and had nothing to say. He realized then that he needed a new language of economics. A language of economics that could make sense of the terrible poverty he was witnessing, both the incredible hardship as well as the enormous creativity involved in overcoming it. So together with his colleagues, he created a framework called Human Scale Development, or Barefoot Economics, because it requires us to step into the mud and practice economics as if people and planet matter. So what is Barefoot Economics? In a nutshell, it is a framework that judges the success of an economy not by how much money is exchanged for goods or services, what we call GDP, but on how well we are able to satisfy our fundamental needs without harming ourselves, others, and the earth. It proposes 9 needs which are constant across time and place and the same for all of us. So whether you are in India, China, or Ecuador, your fundamental needs are the same. What differs are the opportunities you have to satisfy those needs, which are called satisfiers. So you could say that a culture is a set of satisfiers for our fundamental needs at a certain place and a certain time. So the 9 needs are subsistence, to keep our bodies healthy and alive, protection, to feel safe and secure, affection, to feel loved and appreciated, participation, to have a voice and be able to join in with others, identity, to know who we are and where we belong, understanding, to be able to make sense of the world. We have a need for freedom, to have a sense of autonomy and agency, creation, to be able to express ourselves and innovate, and idleness, to have time to rest and relax. So 9 needs and endless satisfiers. Let me explain how this works. We tend to think of food as a need, but what if we looked at it through the lens of Barefoot Economics and saw it as a satisfier for our needs, the most obvious one being subsistence? But the way we produce and consume food can meet many other needs as well. Let's say you had a piece of land and skills and you were able to grow your own food. That would meet your needs for understanding and subsistence. If you made a meal and sat down to eat with family and friends, you'd be meeting your need for creation, affection, identity and participation all at the same time. If, on the other hand, the only food available to you is highly processed and shipped from a part of the world that has very few environmental and labour regulations, that food is likely to harm your health, the health of the people who produce it, and the health of the planet. When I discovered this work, it was as if a door opened in my mind. Here was a framework that described economics as a web of relationships, and I could see how it might help us get back to the art of living well. So I began teaching this language of Barefoot Economics, and for over a decade now I've worked with people from all across the world, from over 30 different countries, many different walks of life and different ages, some as young as 12. Together we explore the many different ways people attempt to meet these fundamental needs, which satisfiers work, which don't, and why. And this is what I've learned. When people look at their lives through the lens of fundamental needs, they quickly realise the limitations of our current economic system. Many of them describe having to work long hours to meet their needs for subsistence, only having to sacrifice the needs for affection, idleness, and participation. Or when they do decide to stay at home and do the important work of caring for children and the elderly, that work is invisible. So we begin to question what it means to be successful. If you have lots of money in the bank, but no opportunities to express yourself creatively, build healthy relationships, or get to know yourself deep down, can you really call yourself rich? Perhaps you're poor in ways that our current economic language simply cannot describe. We also start to question what it means to live sustainably. We look at electric cars, for example, which are often presented as a win-win solution by promising to lower emissions and at the same time grow a booming industry. But when we examine them through the lens of human needs, we see that as well as requiring raw materials from parts of the world that often have lower environmental and labour standards, all cars require roads. Roads go through neighbourhoods and they destroy opportunities for people to connect with each other and for children to play freely and safely in the street. And no matter what your car runs on, it won't lessen the time you spend in traffic jams on your daily commute to work. So this process of separating needs from satisfiers allowed us to drop some of those single measures that we use, such as GDP and parts per million. Instead of simply trying to green our existing lifestyles, we asked, how can we meet the needs that all humans have without harming ourselves, others, and the earth? We open our imaginations, and together we build a completely different picture of the economy, one where our care, compassion, and creativity are allowed to flourish in service of meeting each other's fundamental human needs. And we discover that we are the engine of the economy. We are the real wealth creators, and that we are part of a growing movement of people whose efforts are dedicated to growing good lives for all, rather than making a profit for some. Unfortunately, all those efforts are dwarfed by the powerful forces of the growth economy. Our economic system requires growth regardless of whether what it produces actually meets our needs, often only creating the illusion of satisfaction. Max-Neef called these Pseudosatisfiers. They always leave us craving more. I was once working with a group of teenagers when I asked whether anyone could give me an example of a pseudo-satisfier in their own lives. Immediately, this one young man's hand shot up. "It's my Xbox," he said. "I'm only on it because my friends are on it. I'd much rather be doing something else in person, but I don't feel I have a choice." Or as another young woman said, "I never think about shopping when I'm just having fun with my friends." Pseudo-satisfiers are really the basis of a growth economy. In such a system, our most important role becomes that of consumer, and the satisfiers available to us become limited to the ones that we have to pay for. That is why each year companies spend billions of dollars on advertising, which is becoming increasingly sophisticated. In 2019, pre-COVID, that figure was nearly $587 billion worldwide. That's an enormous force to resist, and it's no wonder that most of us don't manage it. For many of us, buying stuff pseudo-satisfies our needs for affection and identity. It gives us a sense of care and belonging in a world that at times seems devoid of meaning. We are in a strange bind. If the things we produced were made to last, easy to repair, not subject to fads, and really met our needs, we could grow our well-being, our real wealth, and at the same time protect the well-being of others and the earth. But then the growth economy we believe we are dependent on would tank. That is why you'll see that as soon as lockdown ends, the first thing governments will tell us to do will be to get back on the treadmill. Never mind that under lockdown we realised that we need loving touch and good health much more than we need the latest gadgets, that we get more pleasure from our hedges than our hedge fund managers, and that the people who bring real value to our lives are not the bankers. There are food growers, our delivery drivers, our medics, our healthcare workers, our teachers, our musicians, our artists, our neighbours, families and friends, all those people whose efforts meet our real needs. Nevertheless, we will be told to put that aside and return to the usual cycle of overworking and undercaring to grow GDP. Barefoot Economics is an attempt to help us break out of this potentially fatal economic story. It shows us that good economics isn't at odds with our innate generosity and kindness, that we don't have to choose between decent, meaningful work and a healthy planet, that we are all interdependent and we all deserve lives lived with dignity and respect. A good economy is not a prison. A good economy is a thriving web of relationships capable of nurturing and protecting what we hold dear. It's 2021. That little baby boy I held so lovingly in my arms is now nearly 16, taller than his mum and ready to step out into the world. Unfortunately, global CO2 levels are now at 417 parts per million. We passed the 400 part per million mark in 2015, 6 years ago. We are now officially in the danger zone. Still, I cling to the hope that if we reclaim economics as the art of living well and focus our efforts on growing our real wealth, I may just be able to keep my promise. I certainly don't want to have to look my son in the eyes and tell him that we couldn't protect his future, that we couldn't protect the future of all our children, because nobody could find a way to make a profit from it. Thank you.